are live. My name is JP Berg, and this is The Way Forward, a weekly podcast regarding Douglas social credit and monetary reform. So I'm joined with my co-hosts, Dr. Oliver Heydorn and Andre Meloche, and the topic of discussion today will be what is money and what is the purpose of the economy. So this is our sixth episode now. And I'm discovering that in order to really reach people, we have to go back to like first principles here or fundamentals and essentially start to kind of change people's paradigms, because a lot of people think within these parameterized versions of the economy. Like the conventional spectrum would be socialism versus capitalism. So I mean, they can't even kind of grasp anything outside of those parameters. So I think it's very crucial that we kind of start here from the basics, and we actually have some videos to help us out here. So what's your basic take to start us off, Oliver? What is money? Like, give us a little brief breakdown of the history.
Well, according to Douglas, according to what he had to say on the subject, he was quite fond of a definition that was provided by a certain Professor Walker. And Professor Walker basically said that money is anything, no matter what it is made of, that so long as there's a willing seller, no one will refuse in exchange for his goods. So money is basically a ticket. It's a claim on goods and services. And as long as people are willing to accept it, it doesn't matter what it's made out of. Historically, all sorts of things have served as money. Corn, beads, feathers, playing cards, and then of course we have, the gold, silver, bronze, copper, etc. And in the modern world, most of what we have as money that functions as money it's bookkeeping money. It's just accounting entries. And in the computer digital age, of course, we're talking about intangible numbers, something that doesn't have a physical record at all. So there's been this sort of evolution over the centuries, the millennia, in terms of what money can be made out of. But the substance that's made out of is sort of a secondary matter to the fact that people will accept it in exchange for goods.
That makes sense. Do you have anything to add, Andre, regarding that?
Well, Oliver was mentioning goods that could serve as money in exchange for something. You forgot women, because let's not forget, during war, you have war chests, you take hostage, and usually you were exchanging, I'm joking, of course, but true history. But now, true history, you had slave, hostage, and like he was mentioning, double entry bookkeeping. That was maybe the first manifestation of money. You merchant, they were sending their merchandise offshore. And they had to keep a certain inventory because there was pirating and everything. So they had to keep the inventory. So the double entry was necessary in this time to be able to balance the book, if I can say. But yes, true history. And today we talk about cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency with the blockchain shows also that people don't trust money anymore. They use the blockchain because they want to secure their investment, like people were having gold before, bar gold and or silver, metal, until 1930, when the American government confiscated practically all the gold of the ordinary citizen. So money first of all, money is not an asset. It's a symbol. We can refer to Sigmund Freud. He's talking about money in a term of a symbol of power and domination, and it's even more true today.
Okay, so we have a small animated clip we're going to play. I'm going to play it, and then we'll get right back into it.
Episode 1. What is the purpose of the economy? We're often told that the purpose of the economy is to make money, or to create jobs, or to provide moral discipline, or even that it has no normative purpose at all. But what if none of these assertions is true? According to the
I do apologize. I totally played the wrong video there. If you'll all bear with me, I will get myself in order. Gotta love live. One moment. All right, again, I do apologize, but I do have it in order now. I'm going to play it.
Episode 2. What is money and where does it come from? We are often told that money consists exclusively in the physical things we carry in our wallets and purses, notes and coins that are legal tender. But what if this isn't true? According to the social credit analysis of Major C.H. Douglas, not to be confused with Chinese social credit, money is any medium, no matter of what it is made or why people want it, no one will refuse in exchange for his goods. Throughout recorded history, many things have served as money: beads, coconuts, corn, hides, playing cards, salt, shells, sticks, tea, tobacco, copper, silver, gold, metallic coins, paper notes, and many other things besides. In the modern world, money has also taken on the form of bank credit, which exists as mere bookkeeping figures, or, in the computer age, as intangible numbers in a bank's computer systems. Today, there are basically two forms of money: bills, coins, and central bank money in the form of electronic bank reserves that are provided by or on behalf of the state, and commercial bank money or bank credit. The notes in our wallets and coins in our pockets, i.e. currency or legal tender, are only a small part of the money supply. Most of our money is created, out of nothing as it were, in the form of an accounting entry by a commercial bank. In fact, such bank credit constitutes 95% or more of the money supply in most Western countries, with legal tender, which is typically created by a government, constituting the tiny remainder. Whenever a bank makes a loan, buys a security, or makes any other purchase, it creates the necessary money in the form of bank credit by an act of fiat. Similarly, whenever someone or some entity repays a loan to a bank, or buys a bank-held security, or pays to cover the operating costs of banking services, bank credit is destroyed. What this means is that the money supply is not permanent. It does not circulate indefinitely from one hand to another. Rather, it cycles in and out of existence. In order for its volume to remain constant or to increase, new credit must be created at a rate that equals or exceeds the rate of destruction. The commercial banks do not, of course, offer their money creation and destruction services, their bookkeeping duties, for free, or even as a public service at cost. Rather, they regard the money that they create as a scarce commodity that is to be bought and sold for as much interest as a monopoly market can bear. While there are legitimate questions that can be posed about the ethics and even the economics of renting the community's money supply from a private monopoly, the social credit analysis runs in a deeper, more all-encompassing direction. This animated series was sponsored by the Clifford Hugh Douglas Institute for the Study and Promotion of Social Credit.
So it's pretty amazing. A lot of people don't understand this, that we actually have private institutions that issue our credit. That's giving them the ultimate power. And then it's like you're considered a conspiracy theorist for assuming that maybe they have some undue influence over our public servants and our policies. But it's pretty much as you said there. Do you want to elaborate any more on that?
Well, we can, we observe that a lot of people, probably because, they didn't learn about it in school. It's not really a subject that's taught in any depth, or what they were taught is not correct. A lot of people have erroneous ideas about money, about what it is. So some people believe that money is the physical stuff, that it's the notes, the bills, used to be made out of paper, now made out of plastic, and the coins that are minted, that's money. That's legal tender. That's currency. It is money. If you like, it is in our system because it's a fiat system. It is the highest form of money because it's government money, government created money. But that physical money is a very small percentage of the money supply. And in Canada, it's estimated to be something like 3 to 5% of the money supply. So over and against that, you've got this thing called bank credit, which used to be written down in books as accounting entries, bookkeeping money, and is now exists in cyberspace as a mere numeraire, just a enumerated abstraction. And bank credit, you can think of it sort of as second-tier money, because it is a promise to pay currency on demand. But it's created by the private banks. So when the Royal Bank, Scotiabank, Bank of Montreal, Canadian Imperial Bank, TD, etc., whenever they make a loan, what they do is in their books, they regard the loan as an asset. And on the liability column, they have the corresponding bank credit. So if you have a mortgage, let's say, 500,000 mortgage, that's the loan in their asset column. And over and against that, they've created 500,000 in bank credit. So in principle, you could go and ask them, I want this 500,000 in bills. They'd probably have a fit because they don't, they don't carry that kind of money around generally. First tier money, government money. But it functions as money. It's people will accept it. You can buy and sell things, and that's the bulk of the money supply. And if bank buys a security, they also create the money with which they buy that security, right? So, or even if it pays operating expenses, it's creating credit again. It's actually self-financing. The opposite occurs when a bank loan is paid back. Then the bank credit and the bank loan cancel each other out of existence as the bank credit is destroyed. If a bank-held security is sold to the public, again, it's the opposite process. The money is destroyed. The share will change hands, but the money, the bank credit itself will be destroyed. And when we pay through service fees or interest, when we pay to cover the bank's operating expenses, that money is also destroyed, right? So it's a system in which money is constantly, in the form of bank credit, is constantly being created and destroyed. It's cycling in and out of existence. It's not a permanent stock that's floating around and that people get hold of and can do anything with. If somebody has bank credit, generally speaking, it's because somebody else is in debt in one form or another, right? And one of my pet peeves is that you'll have people, let's say, associated with libertarian circles in particular, who'll talk about the government printing money. And it's not entirely clear. I mean, I'm sure some people, they use this sort of as a short form for saying something else, but I think some people use it and they imagine quite literally that when the money supply expands, it's because the bank is literally printing physical bills. And that's not what happens. There is something we could refer to it as state-mediated credit creation, where, let's say, the government sells, let's say, treasury securities to the central bank. The central bank buys it with electronic reserves. So it creates those electronic reserves. But you can't spend electronic reserves directly into the economy. It's got to be deposited in a commercial bank. That will become an asset for the bank. And in the liability column, the bank will create corresponding bank credit, private money entries, and it's that money that is spent into the economy. But even so, when people talk about demand pull inflation, they're creating too much money, most of the expansion of the money supply is done by private banks for private reasons. It's not the government that is uniquely or exclusively responsible for the expansion of the money supply.
So a lot of people, me included, were kind of under the loose impression that essentially people deposit money into a bank and they have assets, and that's what they utilize to loan money out. And that's kind of is that the conventional understanding of how it works, essentially?
Yeah, so that's sort of the loanable funds theory, right? The idea that people deposit money. We don't know where this money comes from. I guess it's government created money. They get paid a certain amount, they deposit it in the bank, and then the bank lends that money to somebody else. But that's not what happens at all. Every new loan is a new creation of money. No one is ever told, you can't access your account because we've lent the money to somebody, right? Mm-hmm. So it's this idea, the loanable funds model of what banks do, is completely false. It's still found, unfortunately, in some economics textbooks, and a lot of people still labor under the illusion that that's what banks do. But actually, banks manufacture the bulk of the money supply, and they destroy the bulk of the money supply in the form of bank credit.
Interesting. Do you have anything to add to that, Andre?
Well, Oliver was mentioning IOU, which is the I owe you something because I goods and services. And it brings me to maybe the quote that I want you to bring, Life of Our Own from Oliver. Because there are two aspects I think that are important. In his book, Oliver, Life of Our Own, he writes, there are just two main problems with this existing financial system, EI, the banking and cost accountancy system. The fundamental problem is located in the industrial price system, the fact that the cost and ends price are generated faster than incomes can be distributed. The secondary problem, which is largely dependent on the first, is the position of domination by bankers and by banking system over the rest of the economy. While the first problem may be thought of as being primarily a technical difficulty with moral implication, the second may be seen as primarily a moral problem with technical presupposition, end quote. Why I refer to this, it's the position of domination. They create money. I think Oliver mentioned it many times. They create money out of nothing. 95% of the money would be created virtually without any assets, because you have a position, a monopoly. So you can try to create money. You say you have $1 million, and you say, okay, I will lend money, and because I have leverage, I have $1 million in my bank account. It's illegal. You don't have the right to do it. So that the position of, you can try it, but you will have a lot of competition. We saw some new banks arriving in Canada in the last 15, 20 years. They were challenging the six major bank, TD, RBC. I think about Orange, Virgin, because they're trying to penetrate the market of a mortgage, for example, or a personal loan. That's one aspect. The other aspect is that people don't know what is money really. I give you just one example. I'm interested in this since many years. What are the derivative product? Derivative product on the market is insurance policy between players. They take derivative product, and the amount of the world derivative product today is $1 quadrillion. 15 zeros. Try to grasp this, people. They cannot even imagine this. Even most economists, they say we don't know how it works, and they say if you remove one card from the pyramid, it will all fall. And it is where it's out of control. I think, in a sense, today the virtual money, quote unquote, is so huge that it cannot reflect the physical economy. And one thing, we think about bank run. Tomorrow, if you have a bank run, everybody goes to their bank and they say, I want to retrieve all my money. That's it. It's over. The system collapsed because, like Oliver was mentioning, 95% of this money does not exist, or it's virtual. If you arrive, and I think the federal government can guarantee your deposit up to a certain level. I think, if I remember, it was $100 billion. But you can imagine if you have a $6 or $7 trillion of deposit, they will say, first of all, we will guarantee the first $100,000 in your bank account, and the rest, it's not guaranteed. So if you have a bank run, it's over. We saw this in Cyprus. I think it was in 2000, if I remember, 2014, 2015, after the crisis in Greek. They had to freeze. They had to freeze their withdrawal. You could not withdraw money. And another case that is very, very problematic is Lebanon. Lebanon people, they have money on their bank account, they cannot access it because it's not there. It's just not there. So in a sense, we have a system that is completely virtual, controlled by a small group of individuals who have a monopoly. They has a monopoly on all the economy, which is not sustainable.
So it's like there's all of these advanced equilibrium theories. I've learned of quantitative easing from Richard Werner and different things like this. And then I started to learn about Douglas social credit, and like Douglas looked at this problem. There wasn't a mystery to it. He kind of discovered this deficiency between the goods and services produced and the salaries paid. So, I mean, where everyone else struggles and sees this as something that's even a mystery in many ways, it's this free market thing that we're all trying to interpret and balance. Douglas was able to diagnose it relatively easily, essentially, at least comparatively. And he definitely doesn't get the credit he's deserved, because no one even knows about him. This has been memory hold. Not only are people economically illiterate, they're very much illiterate of this specific movement, which was rather popular. What are your thoughts on that, Doctor?
Yeah, he hasn't been given the credit, no pun intended. It's rather unfortunate. One aspect I suppose we could stress as well is that, what gives the power to the bank in a practical sense to create this credit. The credit is backed by something. It's backed by the real credit of society. In other words, because there are raw materials out there, labor, know-how, technology, real capital, etc. And on the other hand, because there's a real desire and need to consume goods and services, society has the capacity to produce capital goods, consumer goods that answer to human needs and desires. And that really is the basis of the credit. So in creating financial credit, bank credit, the banks are actually monetizing the real credit. That's the ultimate backing for all money, right? If there was some catastrophe, God forbid, and the capacity to produce goods and services was destroyed, money of no matter what it was made of would have no value whatsoever, right? Because there'd be nothing to buy. So, in the social credit world, we look at this and we think, okay, well, who owns the real credit, right? The banks don't own the real credit. We own the real credit. We as individuals and as a society, the labor, the know-how, the need to consume, that belongs to us. And so if the system were properly designed, the banks would just be monetizing the real credit, creating this financial credit, bank credit, as a service to the community. And therefore, we're not in favor of nationalizing the banking system or anything like that. What we're suggesting is that if banks do well, if they make a profit, they should be rewarded for serving the genuine interest of the community, the common interest, well. They should not derive their wealth and their power by operating a monopoly in their own exclusive interest at the expense of the common interest, which is what happens at the present time. And that has to do with the gap, and we can get into that later if need be. But Douglas's position was, well, the financial credit, it's actually our credit. If the financial system reflected reality and we own the real credit, well, the true owners of the financial credit, we are the true owners. And so the banks are there to serve. And if they serve us well, they'll get rewarded. And if they don't serve us well, then they'll be suitably punished. But the way the system runs right now, that's completely inverted, right? The banks are in a position, as Andre was saying, in a position of domination, where they sort of hold us. They hold the cards, right? And that has to do with the fact that there is this gap, and it should be filled with debt-free credit, but the only way we can fill it is by going back to the banks at the present time and borrowing more money into existence in a futile attempt to borrow ourselves out of debt.
It's like I've been saying, what Douglas perceived in his analysis as a deficiency in the market, these people are exploiting as a feature. What he perceived as a bug and wrote a theorem to address this bug in a pragmatic way, these bankers, these private banking institutions, have been utilizing to their own ends. And it's just been them centralizing and consolidating their power, essentially. Do you have any thoughts on this, Andre?
Well, I was referring to the domination earlier, but also the fact that we have two systems, socialism and capitalism, which is supposed to be classical capitalism, which is not does not exist anymore. I think it's more oligarchy and corporation. And in a sense, you have two extreme. You have two positions that are pretending to bring the best system. I remember in the book of Oliver, Social Credit Economic, there was a phrase that struck me that he was writing, the true purpose of economic association is twofold: to deliver the goods and services which individuals desire, and B, to do this with the least amount of trouble to anyone. So the idea of economy is supposed to serve people. It's not what we have, actually. No matter you look at it, socialism or capitalism are two systems. I always say it's always two faces of the same coin, because you have a control of the means of production and control over the economy by a small group of individuals. And this is what we try to break. For example, there was a law, I think it's still like this, the antitrust law in the United States. When the company is too big, it becomes a monopoly and it can control the market. Then you do not have a free market. Then you use the antitrust law to break this trust, and to bring back a certain level of competition in the market. That's not what we have now. Let's refer to, for example, the GAFAM, Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, and Microsoft. Today you could have, for example, AI and Palantir and many other big corporations. But today, the money does not belong to the people at all. And I'm sorry, the money is a tool. It's a tool. Now the tool is out of our hand. I think we have to understand that we do not control the we do not control our own lives. Maybe that's why the title of the book of Oliver, Lives of Our Own. Let's control our own lives.
Yeah, it's very interesting. With antitrust, like we would break up monopolies essentially, but now we're fed a line that thinks certain industries are too big to fail. So we have a situation where we have privatized profits and socialized losses. We've seen that recently in the Vancouver condo market with Mr. Carney bailing out, using federal funds to bail out investors in the developing condos in Vancouver. So, I mean, this is definitely a big problem. What are your thoughts on this, Oliver?
Yeah, so, in order to clarify things a bit further, when we say that the private banks have a monopoly, or Douglas, one of his most famous books was called The Monopoly of Credit. What we're saying is that no matter how many banks you have in the system, and in Canada, the banking system is particularly centralized because we have the 5 big banks. In the United States, they have many more regional banks and local banks. But no matter how many banks you have in the system, the same idea applies. That is, that private banks are the only entity that have the power to create credit, bank credit. And, this in itself, it would not be such a problem, practically, if it were not for the second issue, which is actually the more fundamental issue, the problem of the price-income gap. So again, Douglas said, you have this money system where money is being created and destroyed, right? It's being created in the creation of loans. It's being spent, and then it's returning to the bank in repayment of loans and being destroyed. So it's cycling like this, round and round. And as money is being created and destroyed, some of that money is being spent on production, but because of cost accountancy conventions, in conjunction with how the banking system cycles, it's generating costs and prices at a faster rate than it's distributing incomes in the form of wages, salaries, and dividends. And so because the monopoly is there, the only power we can appeal to compensate for the gap that's the system creates is, again, the banking system. It's a form of like double dipping, because they're complicit, I suppose you could say, in the generation of the problem. And yet the only way we can solve it is to, the government has to go to them directly or indirectly and borrow money for the purpose of deficit financing, deficit funding. Or consumers have to go to the bank and get a loan, a line of credit, student loan, car loan, mortgage, whatever. Or businesses have to do it in order to expand, in the hope that in the next period they'll be able to recover their funds. So this creates a situation where the debt can never be paid off, really, because in order to, if there's gap between costs and prices on the one hand and incomes on the other, and there are production loans that are coming forward in prices, and we don't have enough income to pay them, well, we can go get another loan. The government can, or businesses can, or consumers can, and that will pay the production debt now, but it's only at the cost of another loan that has to be serviced in the future. And so we're basically trying to pay loans with more borrowed money, and the monopolists are very happy with that situation, whether they realize that that's actually what's going on or not. And Douglas's whole point was that we need to break the monopoly. The banks should not be the only power in society who have this privilege of creating credit. We should have an injection in every period of debt-free credit, distributed directly or indirectly to consumers. So the direct payment is a national dividend, and then you've got the indirect payment of the compensated price, the national discount. And this would be a way, finally, of making the financial system self-liquidating so that we have enough buying power, purchasing power, independently of any additional debt to meet the costs that businesses have a right to charge in order to remain in operation and make a profit.
So essentially, presently, we're operating under like a Keynesian model that services the economy with government debt, essentially. Is that right?
Well, yes. I mean, insofar as you're relying on government deficits to bridge the gap, that is in line with the Keynesian model. There have been times in Canada where the federal government has balanced its books, I think during the Chrétien and Martin years. But that doesn't imply, of course, that the provinces had balanced budgets or that municipalities had balanced budgets. They were still borrowing. But when that happens, if you kind of move away from government deficit financing, okay, so that's good in a sense, because you're not going to have to pay as much interest in the future, so on and so forth. But under the existing system, what you're really doing is you're just moving the obligation to fill the gap to the private sector. So if the government doesn't borrow and spend, well, the consumers will have to pick up the tab. They'll have to borrow more, or businesses will have to expand. And that's kind of what happened during Thatcher and the Reagan years. It's like, okay, let's get away. They didn't put it this way, but it's like, let's get away from government deficit funding as a way of filling the gap. At least that was the rhetoric. And we'll deregulate and privatize, and we'll allow businesses to borrow more money to shoulder more of the burden, through constant economic growth and expansion in the private sector. So, Douglas's whole point was neither of these solutions is a good solution. It's not a stable solution. It doesn't liquidate the problem at the root. It's just a way of kicking the can down the road. And, the total societal debt, either way, it keeps increasing and increasing until it becomes unsustainable, and we have a financial crisis.
And that's what it seems like. We're constantly trying to influx some liquidity, essentially, by this government debt, by personal debt, provincial debt, on basically everywhere we're in debt. What are your thoughts on this, Andre?
Well, recession and growth, or depression or deflation, what we're seeing since 1972 is when they abandoned the gold standard. All the national debt just skyrocketing. And like Oliver was mentioning, we're pushing forward this debt, and it is not sustainable. We are impoverishing people slowly but surely. Every year we're becoming poorer and poorer. That's what I call, it's deflation. The concept of deflation is you don't buy something today because you expect that it will be cheaper next week, because companies, they cannot sell their production, so they have to lower their price. They have to, give you some discount, and you are in a cycle of deflation or in a cycle of depression that we saw after the 1920s, 1920, 1929, 1939, before the war. Then the war kicked in, and then the war machine, the war production compensated this gap. I think I was making a joke today about I will write a short story, a fantastic short story that will be called The Gap, and the gap will be a big monster, a big black hole that absorbs everything. I think because it is not sustainable, you look at socialism and you look at capitalism, and I challenge any economist to come and explain to me that their system is working. It is not working. Both systems are based on false assumption. Why Douglas was so interesting, it's because he, with the perspective of an engineer, he started to really look at what was happening physically, and not just financially or ideologically. You were mentioning Keynes or Adam Smith. I always refer to Adam Smith. Oh, the market regulates itself. No, it's not true. You need regulation. You cannot have freedom is not absolute in a sense. You need barriers. You need accountability. Banks, they are free to do whatever they want. And personally, I think they manipulate the market. We saw it with Trump, for example, with the war in Iran, how he can manipulate the price of oil so easily, which we call inside trading. If you have leverage like this, it's domination. Do we want to live in a society where we are dominated by a small group of individuals? That's not democracy. That does not exist. Maybe this is why the second expression of social credit is called economic democracy. What is the democracy of economy? Economy is supposed to serve people, not the opposite.
I think many people, especially presently, are stuck in this false binary between socialism and capitalism. And there's some people that are super sensitive or hypersensitive to the problems of socialism. So then they naturally gravitate towards capitalism. They're making, arguments for free markets and capitalism. And then there's the antithesis of that. You see a lot of people who are very sensitive to some of the shortcomings of this version of capitalism, and they go to the socialism angle. And that's where a lot of people are stuck. I say myself, I was a big fan of Thomas Sowell and Milton Friedman's explanation. I valued free markets for the sole reason that I knew what the alternative of that was, and I thought it was socialism. I existed within these synthetic parameters. And I think that's where so many people are. And that explains the left-right thing too. This socialism, capitalism, it's a false binary. And we really have to shatter that paradigm to really, truly explain Douglas social credit to people. Oliver?
Yeah, no, I quite agree. I don't know if there's any questions on the the whole business about money, but I was thinking we could also segue to the other video dealing with the purpose of the economy.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. I would actually like to take a moment presently. We're very deboosted in this algorithm. We have about 70 people watching. Those are rookie numbers, so we got to pump those up. If I could please get people to share the stream, it's very advantageous for us to get this message out. So with that said, I'm going to play this next video, and then we will speak about it.
Episode 1. What is the purpose of the economy? We're often told that the purpose of the economy is to make money, or to create jobs, or to provide moral discipline, or even that it has no normative purpose at all. But what if none of these assertions is true? According to the social credit analysis of Major C.H. Douglas, not to be confused with Chinese social credit, the economy has only one fundamental purpose: the delivery of the goods and services people need to survive and flourish with the least amount of human labor and resource consumption. How can we confirm that this is correct? Well, consider the following thought experiment. Let's assume, contrary to fact, and for the sake of argument, that the purpose of the economy is money-making. What would happen if a nation's economy maximized its financial returns but did not provide its citizens with enough goods and services for them to live? The classical and most extreme example for this phenomenon would be an economy that had exported all of its production overseas. Businesses and workers would then have plenty of money, but they would also have nothing to spend it on. Without goods and services to consume, the members of an economic association would eventually perish from starvation, from exposure to the elements, or from other forms of societal collapse, such as a lack of healthcare. Running an economy as if its ultimate purpose were the maximization of financial benefits is self-defeating and unsustainable when taken to its logical conclusion. For this reason, it cannot be the case that the economy exists for the purpose of money-making. The same sort of reasoning can be applied with respect to employment or work. Is the purpose of the economy to create jobs, as many jobs as possible? Well, what would happen if, in an economy run, let's say under a command system where the government totally controls economic life, all sorts of jobs were created, enough to provide everyone with employment in perpetuity, but insufficient goods and services were being produced to maintain the population? Once again, we see that job creation cannot be the economy's purpose either. What then is a sufficient condition for keeping the economy going? The only objective which meets that requirement is actually delivering the goods and services which people expect. Money and jobs are secondary matters. The purpose of production is consumption. If that end is accomplished efficiently, which it should be, so that we can have time and energy to spend on other things besides mere material provisioning, then the economy will give us everything we need to survive and flourish, while calling on the least amount of human labor and consuming the least amount of resources. To treat money-making, employment, or any other incidental, legitimate or otherwise, as the economy's arch purpose is to pervert the economic system from the get-go. And that matters because when things are perverted, they break down. This animated series was sponsored by the Clifford Hugh Douglas Institute for the Study and Promotion of Social Credit. For more information on Douglas Social Credit, please visit socred.org or socialcredit.com.au. Be sure to like this video and please subscribe to our channel.
So I would like to take a minute to just recommend those animated videos. They are an amazing resource for anyone who actually wants to learn more about this system. There's a lot of people that are just not book readers. Unfortunately, we live in that world. And this is actually really convenient. There's 40 videos. You could watch a couple each day, or you could watch them all at once. But it's an excellent resource to learn about this system. So what are your thoughts on this, Oliver?
Well, when it comes to Douglas social credit, the sort of departure point is this question of, what's the economy for? Why do we associate economically? What's the purpose? What's the objective? And it's impossible really to say that an economy, any particular economy, is a good economy or a healthy economy if we don't know what its purpose is. Right? So economics, properly understood, it's not just empirical, it has a normative dimension to it. And we have to ask the question, what's it all about? What are we trying to do? Once we know what the objective is, then we can use that as an Archimedean point. We can use that as a criterion against a standard against which we can measure any particular economy. So, as you saw in the video, if you do a thought experiment, you can test different answers out and see whether they pass the test. If you say, well, the economy exists to give people employment, it exists for work. We can imagine an economy where everyone has a job. We can imagine an economy where everyone is working 80 hours a week, but where production is so meager that people aren't getting the food they need or not getting the shelter they need. Such an economy is not sustainable, right? Another answer is, the economy exists to make money. Well, as you saw in the video, let's say it maximized financial results for us to export everything. We'll export everything, import nothing. We'll export everything we produce for the highest bidder, and we'll maximize profits and salaries and bank accounts. But if we've exported everything, there's nothing to buy, right? And so society will fall apart. People will die of starvation and so on. So that can't be the purpose, right? It's very easy to confuse means and ends. Work, employment is a means. It's not the end of the economy. It's a means to an end. And money also, which will come as a shock, particularly to Whigs or people that have that kind of money-centered mentality. Money is not the purpose of the economy either. It's also just a tool. It's just a means. And so in the Douglas social credit world, we say the economy exists for one purpose only, and that is to deliver all the goods and services people need so they can survive and flourish, and to do it efficiently as possible, with the least amount of labor and the least amount of resource consumption. And measured against that standard, our economy isn't doing so well, and neither is any other economy in the world. So people, I guess it's natural, not knowing anything else, they look at the economy and say, well, it's, it seems to be functioning okay. But if you measure it against what it could and should be doing, it falls short woefully, I would say.
Yes, and it's like we've been discussing, people are very economically illiterate. Even people that shouldn't be. It's one of the biggest things there's a lack of knowledge regarding. So even with this show, like, we try our best to make it approachable and understandable, but a lot of people are intimidated. Once you start speaking of these topics, they can kind of tune out a little bit. So that's a big problem that we face. What are your thoughts on this, Andre?
Well, you were mentioning the small clip and the small video, which are quite nice because you can understand concepts that are complex or that looks complex, but in reality, they're not that complex. When you think about scarcity, why do we have scarcity, and why, for example, full employment is presented as a way to provide income? We know that there's a lot of work that are not interesting and that could be replaced easily. But what we would do with those workers, they would be unemployed, and then we would have to provide welfare. So we always present this as a goal, like Oliver was mentioning. There was a concept in 1980s, Freedom 55 from London Life Insurance. And for a younger generation who don't know this, the purpose was to retire at 55 years old. Why do you retire? If employment is the goal of life, you should work until you die. It's a joke in Soviet Union. They were saying, we don't have any pension in Soviet Union. We just die. Because work was so important that somebody who was not working was considered suspicious. Women, men, everybody. Today, and you don't have this, the Freedom 55, meaning that you do something else. So employment is not the goal of life. Employment is supposed to help us provide goods and services. And I think in the system of Douglas, you would still have people who would work, development, research, a more interesting jobs that would bring creativity to people. And then you would bring the national dividend to people, so you can have enough income to be able to do something else. In the video, we see it. I think it is important to mention that employment is a way to achieve something. It's not the goal of a society. We are stuck with those paradigm that we think that are so important: growth and full employment. And Douglas is I would say, is deconstructing those two stereotype that I would say. Even all neoclassical economists, they will talk about this like it is necessary. It is not, especially today with what is happening with AI.
Yeah, it's like you were saying, Oliver. It's the means to an end in a lot of cases with a lot of jobs, and it's essentially serving the purpose of distributing income. That's the sole premise. So just to let everyone know, we actually jumped up to about 100 viewers, which is good. We're going to get to the questions at around the 1 hour mark, so in a few minutes, essentially. If anyone has any questions, be sure to leave them, and we will get to them. So is there anything else you'd want to add, Oliver, before we go to the question portion of the show?
We often have in society as well this idea that, everyone has to work for a living. Everyone's got to earn a living, unless, of course, you're a capitalist or you've got inherited wealth. And if you're on the right of the spectrum, then that's fine. This is another way that sort of Douglas cuts across the false left-right divide. The response of the socialist or the left-winger to all this inherited wealth, or what they see as unearned wealth, the profits of the capitalist, is to seize that and to redistribute it. Whereas what Douglas wants to do is, let's not restrict profit. Let's expand profit. Let's turn everybody into a capitalist in some measure, right? Let's all have an unearned income, which actually has been earned by all the inventors and engineers and organizers who expanded the real capital of society and enabled us to produce more and more or better with fewer and fewer people actually working. And that replacement of labor with technology, with real capital, is actually the factor that is driving this gap as well. Because in the name of real capital, companies have to make all sorts of charges to repay capital loans, for depreciation, for maintenance, these charges are not distributable in full or at all as concurrent income to consumers. So they've got all this real capital and they've got to levy all these charges just to make sure they've got enough money to keep the real capital going. And consumers are not automatically given enough buying power. Instead of telling the consumer, oh, go and get a loan from the bank, the extra money that the consumer needs and the extra money that the retailer requires also, that is something that should be, in a sense, given to us for free, because we have, through the cultural heritage and the unearned increment of association, it's already been earned. The profit is there. It just, there's a surplus that the system does not know how to distribute except by getting somebody to go into debt currently.
It's one of the interesting arguments I've heard since learning about this is like entrepreneurs in the present day, they're building on already created infrastructure, using already created technology in lots of instances. You look at someone like Mark Zuckerberg that created Facebook. I mean, he didn't invent the internet, but he very much benefited off of that infrastructure being created. So all of that profit just goes to him. That's not really fair. There should be some going to the commons in some sense. Now for me, again, where I come from, more the traditional right economically, I really had a hard time with a lot of these concepts, because if I heard this 6 months ago, I would have said, oh, well, they're communists. Mm-hmm. That's some far out there. But again, this system, what's so brilliant about it is you could sell this to the left and the right just as easily. It's like you say, this is a national dividend. That's capitalism. A dividend mm-hmm. is capitalism. It's enfranchising people. It's making you, the citizen, a shareholder of the entire endeavor. So if anything, it's more capitalism than this present incarnation of it, mm-hmm. which is very interesting. And with the left, this is actually addressing the inequality in a pragmatic way that doesn't result in a dictatorship of the proletariat. Like, this is an actual solution. So in my eyes, it's not even in the center. It just shatters that entire paradigm. It cuts to the core of our issues. And that's what I say. This is the causational factor for almost all of the ills of society. So with that said, we got about 110 watching. I will appeal once again. I know I'm very repetitious with this, but it's the only way we get any reach. If you guys could please share this, I'll even challenge you a little further. If you could send it to anyone you think might enjoy this type of content, it's very much appreciated on our behalf. So with that said, we're going to go to some questions here. I will read the question and then I'll throw it over to Oliver and then Andre. So we have Bob Lior. If you want to read an accessible social credit inspired book on money, try Eric Demer's A Matter of Life or Debt. I would assume you're familiar with this work, Oliver.
Yes, Eric Demer. A Matter of Life or Debt. It's a small book, but it's very well written and very comprehensive and quite interesting. Eric Demer was, I suppose you could call him, a first generation social creditor from the UK. He was an architect. So there were a lot of high profile people who once upon a time were on board the social credit monetary reform train. And many people wrote books about it, articles, gave speeches, led study groups, created journals, magazines. So that came out of this. And I don't know whether a digital version of that book is available anywhere, but you should be able to order it from a used bookstore, or perhaps it's even on Amazon.
Interesting. Are you familiar with this work, Andre?
Nope, but I will definitely try to find it.
Yeah, there's so much interesting material and resources out there. And again, you bring up an excellent point, Oliver. Like, people have to understand how big this movement was, especially in Commonwealth countries like in Canada, New Zealand, Australia. And there's still pockets of it, but it's been memory hold.
Yeah.
And it's rather convenient, or I'll say suspicious, that actually offers a pragmatic solution, a true alternative to our current immensely corrupt system, and this is what's memory hold. So it's definitely a little suspicious. So with that said, we have, wow, it's all Bob in the comments. So
we might have to bring Bob on the show.
Bob's going to just have to come on and join us, I think. As Douglas said, the banker is solely capable of lending something without parting in anything.
Uh-huh. Yes, that's a quote from Breakdown of the Employment System, I believe, which is an article or a speech that Douglas gave in 1923. And that's available readily enough on socred.org and also on the Australian League of Rights site. Yeah, it goes something like, the banker is the only example of someone who can lend something without parting with anything and making a profit on the transaction.
Interesting.
So
I will add, I'm going to, I generally do, but on this stream on X, I will put a link to the Socred site as well as the YouTube videos, because again, those animated videos were amazing for me in initially starting to wrap my head around this, and it is rather complex, especially for people coming from a point of not just economic illiteracy, but intentional economic illiteracy. It's like we have a lot of misconceptions regarding it, and there's a lot of mystery involved. So I will do that. Do you have any comments on that comment, Andre?
Well, just, like the devil always wants you to believe that he does not exist. Bankers, they lend you something that does not exist. They don't have any assets. They have privileges. I think Oliver mentioned it earlier. So they create something, and then after that, you owe them something. Mm-hmm. So this is something that I've seen all the time. They control the economy. They control the economy, and I think we have to. I think we have to break this monopoly. And it is not the dictature of proletariat. It's not. It has nothing to do with the socialist protest or revolution.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's very much anti-socialist. A lot of people like Joshua Haldeman, Elon Musk's grandfather, he wrote an article that was saying this is one of the biggest things to prevent socialism. Right. This is the best system to enact to prevent people from going for that, because you got to think back in the 1920s, this was shortly after the Bolsheviks revolution, and that was a major concern for a lot of countries. They didn't want to see what happened there. And this was presented, and a lot of people, Ezra Pound, Charlie Chaplin, like 100 years ago, this was all the rage. And it built, like in Canada, we had political parties that held power provincially. We had MPs that were social credit MPs, and yet it's memory hold. So that's the whole premise of this show, is to really reintroduce this idea and challenge people. I'd really like someone to come on and try to poke some holes in it. And that's the biggest thing I think we're going to encounter is, oh, that's socialism. It's like, no, dude, it's so far outside of that spectrum, you can't understand it. And that's the problem. A lot of people won't understand it and they'll poke at it. Mm-hmm. But I think it's necessary to kind of, like I said earlier, to shatter that paradigm. So more Bob Lior. Douglas's core accusation is prices contain items not represented by money anywhere, and that the unmonetized items are represented by debt, which is increasing and which cannot be liquidated. So that's fairly straightforward.
Yes. So yeah, that's the core cause of the price income gap. That we've got these charges, we've got these capital recovery charges in that are a feature of the process of production. And there's no money on the consumer side to offset it. There's no money being distributed to offset those charges either in whole or in part. And so the only way we can compensate for it, because we've got to get the money from somewhere, is to have somebody go into debt. And this occurs in every single economic cycle where somebody, the government, consumers, businesses, somebody has to go into debt to help fill the gap. And as time goes on, of course, more debt is being contracted, or debt is being contracted at a faster rate than it's being paid back. So the overall societal debt grows and grows and grows. So that's the debt is increasing and cannot be liquidated until, of course, it gets to be so heavy that it overturns the apple cart. We have a crisis. Debts get wiped out. There's a lot of pain and suffering in the interim, but then we can start the system again. So that's one. The system. We haven't talked so much about this, although Andres touched on it. Even in situations where we can't fill the gap through increased debt, nevertheless, the system will rely, let's say, on businesses to subsidize the consumer by lowering prices and sort of relying on their own private stores of credit to survive for another 6 months or another year, et cetera, for as long as they can. That's what happens with a recession or depression. That can't go on forever. But yeah, there are times and periods when the system says there's too much debt. Somebody has to basically eat their capital for the benefit of the consumer and keep the system going a little while longer, and then we'll have a reset. So even the constant inflation is part of how the system survives, because as inflation is fundamentally not caused by demand pull, like everyone thinks. It's actually cost push. And it's the necessity of having to service the debt that is the biggest factor driving constant inflation. But as prices are inflated and money buys less and less, past debts, the weight of past debts is relativized. And so that's another way of sort of dealing with this debt monster that, oh, well, in 10 years, 100 million won't be quite as much as it is now. And that's another way of keep kicking the can down the road, hobbling along, and then 100 years has passed, and a dollar can only buy 5 cents worth what it was able to buy in the past. So it's quite, we take it all for granted. People, they live day to day and they don't see what's happening over a period of 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and how the system is constantly degenerating, really.
So it's almost like a Ponzi scheme, and it's kind of predicated on this endless growth that is, we can't achieve it. So it inevitably will fail and has to be serviced or reset, like you said. Do you have any thoughts on this, Andre?
Well, Oliver was mentioning, a crisis. You have the debt jubilee, where you have, after a certain time, 5, 7, 10 years, you just wiped out the debt. 2012, if I remember, after the economic crisis in Greece, it was in 2011. They just created what we call bad banks, and they put all the junk assets there, and they say, okay, we will try to liquidate those assets. Of course, you had speculators who start to speculate on those bad debts, and but this is one way of trying to, like Oliver says, liquidating those assets. This devaluation, if I can use the expression. And you have many mechanisms that are not explained because they are just used by economic actors to stabilize the system. But in a sense, when you look at for example, the value of the American dollar lost 95% of its, the American dollar lost 95% of its value since, I think, 1935, 1940. It is huge. you are being more poor day after day. This is what they call growth. The dichotomy is incredible, and nobody wants to look at the like we say the elephant in the room.
You're good. So, Bob, again, is that the biggest misconception in economics, that non-bank businesses make money?
I don't know whether it's the biggest misconception, but we have this figure of speech where we say that somebody's gone into business to make money, but of course they're not literally creating money. They're just capturing money that's somebody else had, and too few people consider the question of, well, where does all this money come from? Who's actually, what's the source of society's money? Where is it coming from, and for what purposes is it injected, and under what conditions is it created and issued? And those questions, I mean, what the banks do, yes, it's a business that they run, but it affects everybody else's business. So it's kind of unique in that way. How do you get? We all need money. How do you opt out if you don't like the way the system is running? How do you opt out of that? It's quite difficult. So because the business of the banks is so important, everyone else's business depends on their business. It should operate in the common interest. It's part of society's infrastructure, right? The financial system is part of societal infrastructure, just like the roads or electricity. And so we need to know that the common interest is being well served, and it's not the case that there's a small group of people who are benefiting disproportionately or at the expense of the rest of us.
It's kind of wild how dysfunctional our system is, and how hyper normalized that we all treat. No one even offers a modicum of scrutiny. We just accept it, and we get in the rat race, and we try to accumulate wealth, and we never think of, like, what is this serving? And that's the profundity of this system. Is you really, to understand what it would look like, you have to get out of that scarcity mindset and imagine a world where the economy served people. We would live in a perpetual state of abundance. And we could, it's like people say in this movement frequently, we have poverty in an age of plenty. And this is a problem with distributism, essentially. Do you have any thoughts on this, Andre?
Well, I think yes, you're mentioning distributism, and maybe in a future episode we could distinguish social credit, which is a certain form of distributism, and we could also maybe tackle the collectivism, and how those systems are not properly designed to meet the good and the services for people. We make money. You cannot eat it. Midas and gold. He was not quite happy when he started to understand that he would starve to death because everything he was touching was turned into gold. And there's a native, I think it's a native chief of he said, one day when we will have consumed everything on the planet, we will realize that you cannot eat money. So you can make money, but like in the small video, if you export everything and you create nothing, one day you starve.
Yeah, that's a really good quote. I heard that one myself. So we have another one from Bob. It's all Bob in the questions. I would really like to appeal. We have 130 people watching. Any questions you guys have, we will try to make it as simplistic as we can and provide an answer for you. But in the meantime, we'll go to the next Bob question. Could you expand a bit more on the notion that debt money cycles and does not circulate?
Yes. So a lot of people actually have this idea that the money supply is permanent and it's just changing hands. So one of the common objections to certain aspects of Douglas's analysis is the claim that $1 can cancel multiple costs. So for example, someone might say, well, I go to the baker, I pay $1 or whatever it is now for a loaf of bread, And then the baker, he's going to run out and he's going to take that dollar and he's going to buy, I don't know, potatoes for dinner or something, or shoes, whatever it is. And they don't realize that, no, the baker can't do that. The baker has costs, right? So let's say he was operating on a line of credit where he paid his workers, he paid for the raw materials. He's got to take that dollar that I give him and use it to pay down his overdraft. And when money is used to pay down a line of credit or a loan of credit, the money is destroyed, right? So it's helped to cover his costs, which means that the next day he can borrow that dollar again for the next cycle of production, but it's not available for him as personal purchasing power, right? So that's why it's so important to understand that money is being created and destroyed, and because it's being created and destroyed, it's operating in an accountancy cycle. It's not something permanent that circulates like in a pool. And that's critical for understanding how the gap is generated, because basically what's happening is that where real capital is concerned, the money is being created, it's being spent, it's returning to the banking system, it's being destroyed, it's generated costs in that going through that cycle, but it hasn't distributed any personal income with which those costs can be met. So if the money is destroyed before the good or service goes to the consumer to be liquidated, there's no automatically any consumer buying power with which those costs can be met. So I mean, one way of looking at this too is just to think as a thought experiment. What would happen tomorrow if Mr. Carney, for example, said, we're going to pass legislation. From now on, banks will not be able to create credit for consumption. Right, so no more mortgages, no more student loans, lines of credit, credit cards, car loans, etc. No, we're not going to allow the bank to serve that function. Well, there would be a huge lack of buying power that we currently rely on, and the gap would become visible. It would become obvious that actually we're not being paid enough in income to buy back in full whatever we produce, and we're reliant on all this extra debt financing from the banking system to muddle along. So basically what Douglas is saying is, all that consumer debt, for example, we need it. We need it as consumers, and the businesses need it, the economy needs it, but it shouldn't be a debt. It should be a dividend. So dividend instead of debt. What if the government, let's say the National Credit Office, gave everyone a card, like a debit card, and every month they put $1,500 on it, and that would be your compensatory debt-free credit money that you could spend as you wished that month, and the next month you get another $1,500 instead of all this consumer debt.
And it's important presently to differentiate between a traditional UBI type of a situation, which would be like a socialist model, with a UBI, which sounds very similar. Mm-hmm. You would get an amount each month, but that could be leveraged against you. You know what I mean? In a system where you're not entitled to it, it's not a dividend payment where you as a shareholder are being rewarded for being part of this structure, this system. This is just predicated on a universal basic income. So you could meet your costs, but then it's that control factor.
Right. So there are at least three differences there, right? It's the UBI is basically a social program, and it's financed through the existing monetary system. So there's no monetary reform. It's financed through redistributive taxation or an increase in public debt. And because the government is financing it that way, it thinks it then has the right to say, well, you want your UBI, you've got to comply with A, B, C, and D. And the other difference, of course, is that the dividend, like any dividend, let's say corporate dividend, it's not guaranteed under social credit at a certain level. It depends what the economy can afford. It depends on the size of the gap. So 1 month you might get $1,500, another month you might only get $1,450, another month you might get $1,600. Right? So it depends how much debt-free compensatory credit is actually justified by the size of the gap. It's your right as a citizen, right? There are no strings attached. There are no conditions, and it's not robbing Peter to pay Paul, right? We're not taking the money off anybody, and it's not increasing the public debt.
It's a more realistic interpretation of the economy, which is to serve people. Do you have any thoughts on this, Andre, to add?
Well, toward the money cycle that does not circulate, I think there's another phenomenon that Oliver is mentioning in his book, Social Credit Economic. It is saving. People, they save money. Like you take this example of the baker. It says he has some cost to cover, but let's say he's deciding to keep this dollar or half of this dollar to save it for the future. Let's say for his retirement or for whatever reason. That money does not circulate and is not liquidate. So I think if I remember in your book, there are many factors that could break this cycle of money, and which will inevitably end up in debt money, because you will have to bring this money somewhere to fill the gap.
Yeah. So there are many other factors beyond, let's say, the A plus B factor that can contribute to a lack of consumer buying power, and certainly savings is one of those factors. Yeah.
Interesting. So we have one more question from our favorite asker, Bob. I like to bring up references not written by Douglas because it puts the lie to sneer that Douglas is a crank or a heretic. There's a lot of material written about social credit. So what are your thoughts on this?
There is Oliver? A tremendous amount of material written on social credit. If you go to socred.org, for example, and you look at other authors, you'll find digital copies of, I don't know how many authors, but there are a lot of them, people that wrote books, articles, etc. There's a tremendous amount of literature on social credit that was written, I suppose, primarily in the 20s, 30s, 40s, but even afterwards. And unfortunately, this is, Douglas is not very well known, and this material isn't either. Douglas had a number of, he sort of had a team around him. He had people like Tudor Jones and Jeffrey Dobbs, Tudor Jones was a physicist. Jeffrey Dobbs was a botanist, I believe. Brian Monahan. These are all sort of first generation social creditors, professional people who thought that Douglas was spot on. And this was, in some ways, the single greatest thing that you could spend your life on, just because the ramifications were so vast and so deep.
Yeah, I've no doubt that there's a lot of detractors presently that'll try to dismiss this, but Douglas was very respected in his era. Like, there was tons of people that got on board with this. Even Keynes, as you mentioned, referenced Douglas to be one of the greatest economists. I mean, it's not like now they might look back and try to present it as if he's some kind of heretic or a crank, as Bob said, but in his own time, he was immensely respected for this theorem. Do you have any thoughts, Andre, on this?
Well, if you bring the quote of Eric Butler, so we can have a little bit of fun about what is an heretic. When I refer to the left or the right, and John Paul, I think you're spot on when you see that they fall into a rabbit hole. If you're not a socialist, you have to be a capitalist. And what I find funny is that those people are always painted as extremists, but they're not. As a matter of fact, they're just weaponized. And there's a quote in the book of Eric Butler, Social Dynamic, about what is really extremism. He says, those who insist that they are unchanging absolutes, which can only be ignored at great danger, are often charged with being extremists, quote unquote. The original dictionary meaning of extremism is the taking of painstaking care. All those who travel in aeroplanes feel much more at ease when they realize that extremists, quote unquote, have built their plane, end quote. So why I found that quote very funny, because can you expect somebody who's hired by DEI to engineer a plane? Will you be will you be comfortable? An engineer who's designing a system has to be extreme. He has to watch every aspect of the design so the plane will fly. So in a sense, both group of people on the political spectrum, they're not extremism. They just don't want to see reality. The left lives in a virtual reality, thinking that we have to distribute everything to everybody equally without nobody working, or the government will provide everything. And the right, it will be a small group of individuals. They live in a fantasy. Douglas was living in reality. He was an engineer. I always come back on that. And he was not an heretic. I think there's a lot of people who were accusing him of being disillusioned or not pragmatic. On the contrary, a lot of people joined the movement because they saw that this man was basing his diagnosis on fact. So he's not an heretic, on the contrary.
Mm-hmm.
So that pretty much brings us to the end. Do you have any parting words, Oliver?
Parting words, yes. There's a group over in the UK called Positive Money. They're not social creditors, but they support a certain idea for monetary reform. And a few years ago, they did a survey of the British MPs, and apparently something like 85% of British MPs did not realize that the bulk of the money supply is created by private banks whenever they make a loan or purchase. It's 85%. And I would imagine that I don't think it's changed very much. I mean, does Krista Freeland was Minister of Finance? Would she have known, or would she know now, where money comes from? That the private banks create the money supply in the form of bank credit. I saw a question that was posed. I don't know if it was in the House of Commons or it was in a committee meeting, but somebody had asked her for some figures or some information, and she couldn't answer. She had no clue, and it was just waffle. It's like, it's anyway. We won't end on that because it's just too depressing.
Yeah, they're not very impressive people. Some of these bureaucrats. Do you have any parting words, Andre?
Well, I just brought a small anecdote. If you want to display it, it's just for the purpose of making things real. It's my wife who told me this little anecdote. It's a group of university professors are on board a plane bound for a city hosting an international conference on science. I could have said social credit, but shortly before takeoff, the flight attendant and the captain addressed the passenger. Ladies and gentlemen, dear professor, they say, the captain and I would like to pay tribute to all your students who design and build this airplane, end quote. At the announcement, all the professors, seized by panic, stand up, grab their luggage, and rush for the exit. Only one professor remains calmly seated. Aren't you frightened? The flight attendant asked him. The professor replies, I know my student very well. This plane will never fly. End quote. So the idea is to be part of reality. And Douglas was a very pragmatic man. And I think this is where a lot of people will either attack the system or try to discredit him because they have no other argument. We have to be rational to be able to have a discussion. And I think that's what we're trying to do here with the way forward.
100%. I mean, for me personally, discovering this, going to Rougemont to learn about this for the Douglas Social Credit Convention, like I feel like I was let in on a secret. And now I feel an obligation to explain this because this answered so many questions for me. And it's like you said when I first met you, Dr. Oliver, like you can't look at the problems of society in the same light again after you learn this.
Right.
It's that transformative. And I firmly believe, this is a variation of something I heard you say as well, that the only reason there's not tens of millions of Douglas social creditors is that they simply don't know of it. It's been memory hold to that extent. So we endeavor to change that. And you can help. I'll tell you how, by sharing by liking, by subscribing, by even potentially, like I said, I'll challenge you to send it to people you think might enjoy this type of content, because just as it's memory hold, like we can't get past the algorithms with this at all. So it's very advantageous for us if you could do that. And we do this every Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern. We'll see you next week. Cheers.